Welcome to the EntrePastors podcast on YouTube. This is a show that helps pastors think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs. Well, hello there, and welcome to the EntrePastors podcast on YouTube. My name is Jon Sanders, one of the co-hosts of the show, and this week in our episode, we're going to be hearing from Steve Wormer about his nonprofit called Hurt to Hope. Steve is a great example of someone who is taking his skill set that has been honed over years in pastoral ministry and transferring it into a new kind of ministry. Incidentally, this one is in more of a nonprofit setting versus a for-profit setting, but Steve is going to share that there still is revenue streams created in a nonprofit model. And so as he applies the skills that he's learned in pastoral ministry of helping people in areas of their emotional trauma and the hurts of their past, to helping them overcome that, we're going to hear how he's not only serving those people, but building a business and a stream of revenue alongside of that as well. So great conversation coming your way. We look forward to sharing it with you. Sit back, relax, enjoy. Here is the conversation between me, my co-host Les Hughes, and this week's guest, Steve Wormer, in episode number 110, Hurt to Hope. Here we go. Well, Steve, it is my pleasure to welcome you as a guest to the EntrePastors podcast, man. Welcome to the show.
Hey, I'm thrilled to be with you guys. You guys doing all right this Monday?
It's all good. Even
Yeah,
on
we're having
Monday.
a good day.
That's
We're having a good day. I love Mondays. I know there's that thing we're not supposed to love Mondays, but I love a new week where we get up and get to
I'm with you, man.
Building it again.
See, there's one other thing that's another reason I like you, John. It's just I keep adding to the list, man.
There's lots of reasons to like me.
Lots of reasons.
Let's be honest.
Lots of reasons.
But I love Mondays. And you know what's getting ready to start up again very soon? Monday Night Football. You may not care about that, but I'm excited about it. So anyway, you a football fan, Steve?
I love football. Great call.
Who's your team? The interview may be over very quickly. Depending.
I was going to say this might not go well. I'm a Tennessee Titans fan.
Oh, you're not anybody. No one cares about that, so you're fine. We're going to be just fine together, Steve.
Now, if you just said Tennessee Vol, I'd have hit it myself.
That too, Les.
Careful. You got to draw the line somewhere.
I've got some good friends down there where you're at, so I get the competition.
All right, well, let me rescue this interview before it just falls apart entirely. But Steve, what part of the world are you in? Give us a little bit of a background as to how you got into pastoral ministry, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, well, I live in Memphis, Tennessee. Been here about 3 years. What brought us to Memphis is where my wife and I are in the ministry, and we are native Tennesseans actually, but from the Nashville area is where we were converted, and that was several years ago. And then we got our feet wet by leading. At the time, it was a house church not far from where Les is, outside of Huntsville, Alabama. We didn't have to move there because I kept my job. It was just an opportunity to preach and teach every week, fellowship, kind of see if this is what I wanted to do. It grew a passion for it quickly. And then we thought we would be in the Southeast where all our relationships were, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, etc., and had solid interviews with some churches in those areas. But typical of God, he took us out of our comfort zone, and we went into the full-time ministry in Springfield, Illinois several years ago. Did that for several years, enjoyed that, grew our faith quite a bit. We were praying about new opportunities, and God brought us back to Tennessee, but to Memphis this time.
Fabulous. So you are in full-time vocational pastoral ministry as we speak?
So we pastor a small church, about 60 in Memphis, not including the kids, and I'm the only full-time employee. Yep. And my wife is the women's ministry leader in a part-time capacity.
Gotcha. Well, and so that would put you squarely in the very normative range for what pastoring looks like in our world today, leading a church that's well under 100. And if the church is fortunate enough to have staff at all, it's usually just one person. And so, welcome to the very normative club, man. You represent probably a large percentage of our audience with those types of statistics. And that's not all you do. Like so many of the guests, pretty much all the guests that we have on the show, they have something else that they're building on the side, whether it's in the marketplace, whether it's a for-profit business or a nonprofit. And, we see all of it as ministry, no matter who they're serving. So let's talk a little bit about that journey. What is it that you're a part of? What is it that you're building? And we'll start unpacking it from there.
You're the first person this year that's called me normal, so I appreciate that.
Normative was
yeah,
we can
true.
play back the tape if we need to. So.
That's true. So what you're alluding to that I'm involved with is a nonprofit organization that's called Caring Resources. However, by my screen, you'll say, well, that doesn't say Caring Resources. Our bread and butter program is called Hurt to Hope, and you see that it stands for Helping Overcome Painful Experiences. We provide workshops that are obviously Christ-centered. They typically last 10 hours over usually a Friday night and an all-day Saturday format. It can be easily modified to fit the need of whoever needs it. But it's typically done Friday and Saturday night, both in person and virtually, like everybody else had to learn how to do it virtually in 2020. And those workshops, what I say is it's for people, and I think you'll agree when I say this is for all 8 billion people on planet Earth with unprocessed emotions. It can be grief, it can be relationship challenges, bitterness, unforgiveness, just having problems dealing with a disappointment in life, like maybe being passed over for a promotion or something like that. But it's all in that genre. All of its emotions that haven't been processed in a healthy way. And so we teach you how to do that and then give you some skills practically to go along with the faith-based lessons to carry those tools into, Jesus said, you will have trouble. So life keeps coming at us. Mm-hmm. And we want to give you the tools for when life keeps happening to deal with it in a healthy way. So from a faith-based perspective, these workshops have a lot of teachings from Paul, Job, and Joseph specifically.
Okay. Who's kind of your ideal audience member for these workshops? I mean, obviously people with hurt, which that opens you up again to 8 billion people in the world who've had, painful things in their life. But is there a kind of a target audience of who seems to be most attracted to, or that you're maybe pursuing most for these workshops?
I would say historically, there has not been a target audience. Now moving forward, as my wife and I have gotten more involved with the organization, we are wanting to get more involved specifically with ministers. Obviously, being a minister myself, I understand the loneliness of the job, the demands of the job, everything that goes with that. And I believe there's a lot of, we'll say hurt, we can say wounded, whatever word we want to use. But I think there's a lot of wounded pastors out there that could benefit from this workshop. And then we did our first workshop for an entire congregation in Jacksonville, Florida last year. And it was phenomenal what the Lord did with it. I mean, we had people coming up to us in between sessions in tears, like, I've been holding on to this for 25 years and haven't told anybody. I've had this against this church, since 2003, and just totally vulnerable. Of course, we're coming in from the outside. We're the safe place. So you would expect some of that, but just the stories that kept pouring in, weeks and even months after that workshop were phenomenal. We want to do more of those also. While I'm in this, current role of wearing two hats, so to speak, it limits my time to be able to focus on expanding the program. But that is the initial vision, is to reach ministers and more churches with the program.
You're saying like someday down the road, when the two hats you're referring to are leading a church and then also leading the nonprofit. And so way down the road, maybe there's an opportunity where you're able to focus just more on the one. Is that kind of what you're alluding to there?
I would say I'm definitely alluding to that. And it's probably not even way down the road, John. I'll give you one example. We have a denomination in Illinois that has retained our services to do workshops for ministers in April of 2024. So we're Zooming with them every month to put the details together, save the date, flyers, things like that, to start promoting it well in advance to give their ministers time to save the date.
Yeah, there you go. Well, and here's something too, Steve, that I know kind of about your backstory, but maybe I'll ask you just to speak to this. This is not an organization that you founded, correct? This was in operation, but you're coming alongside and really leading it to new levels. Is that something you can speak to?
Yeah, absolutely. Caring Resources was found by two wonderful ladies back in the late 90s. I don't think we have time to go into the whole backstory of how that was done, but
Sure.
My wife and I got involved pretty heavily in 2017. She had been through it. Both my mom and her mom died in 2006 within 3 months of each other. And so Rebecca, being the more emotionally stable and spiritually sound person in 2006, she said, I got to get some help for this loss. And she went and took one of these workshops, Hurt to Hope workshops, at our home church in Nashville at the time, and just raved about all that she learned from it and how it helped her. Of course, I was the typical guy, pull myself up by the bootstraps. I'll be okay. Just stick to my work. And what happened was, as more years rolled by, I was like, I've really not dealt with this in the most healthy manner. And so I went through it in 2017. And it was when I went through it, Rebecca went back through it with me, that we started developing a relationship with the owners. And we stuck together relationally, started talking, started praying about the future. They started giving us, small responsibilities here and there to where we are today, where it's been handed off to us.
Very good. One question we often ask, and maybe here we can transition a little to talk about some of the business model side of this. And again, keeping in mind, all of this is ministry. So we don't have to check one at the door to now focus on the business part of it. But a lot of times when we have someone on the show that is working in a nonprofit or launching a nonprofit, we'll often ask the question, why nonprofit versus for-profit? And again, in this case, this was already established and you're coming on board. And there's a lot of times there's very valid reasons for why we're doing this particular thing as a nonprofit versus a for-profit entity. But maybe I'll ask you to speak to that a little bit. Again, keep in mind, the majority of our audience are pastors who, quite frankly, are sick and tired of being broke and would desire to have another stream of revenue. And so some might be tempted to hear, well, in a nonprofit, there's no profit to be made, or there's no money to be made in a nonprofit, but there is a business model to that. You can, create some income for yourself through that. So do you mind speaking to that part of it? Like, how has this nonprofit, how has this checked that box in terms of being an additional stream of revenue that's added to you and your family's bottom line?
Great question. I'll work it somewhat backwards. It has not added income to me directly quite yet.
Okay.
So from a non-profit perspective, you're right. I'm inheriting it. So we want to stay in compliance with what's already been done.
Mm-hmm.
I will speak to the potential for additional income, though, is still a great possibility within a nonprofit. And I'll give you an example. We retained a grant writer back over the holidays. And obviously it takes some time to develop grant plans, apply for these things, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we're on the cusp of seeing the fruit of that. I mean, I just got off the phone with our grant writer about an hour ago, and I know for a fact that we have our first two grants coming in the mail later this week. And I know a third organization that is wanting to see the approval letters of those first two, and they're ready to send out a check. So what I can tell you is the small nonprofit and I don't think I've mentioned this, it's never had a need to monetize, now has a need to monetize. We have a budget that's significant. And far as income for me, which is what you guys are all about, the side businesses that ministers can create additional income, it's going to be significant to me. I'm like you said, it's just church of 60, less than 100. I'm the only full-time staff. It's all those things. So it wouldn't surprise you if I told you, and I'm not trying to say this as a complaint, but it wouldn't surprise you to hear me say, hey, what I make is not market value. It's well below. We're doing okay, but could be doing a lot better. We're grateful for what we have, but we're struggling too.
Mm-hmm.
And the nonprofit's going to take my family eventually when the ideal budget is met. When you're dealing with a nonprofit that has grants coming and going, your budget really has to be able to expand and contract all the time. But when it gets where it's supposed to be, it's going to be a significant boost to my family's income.
There you go. Well, I love that, man. I'm grateful that that's part of the story that's being written there. And again, for some listening, that may be encouragement as a path forward to see hope in that, like for their own story of what that could look like. Here's a question for you. Something that is not uncommon that we see pastors struggling with when they either think about launching something or even as they're starting to do something in addition to their pastoring is it's mindset stuff, it's guilt, it's a lot of times even self-imposed talk, that I don't know if you should be doing that. Are you really giving your best as a pastor now because you're also building this thing over here? Like, did you bump into any of those mental hurdles? And if so, how did you overcome those? Or even did you have like direct voices of other people saying, hey, we don't think we like it that you're building this thing over here, and part of that? Or has that been largely well supported? Like, what are some of the things you've bumped into, and how did you get through that as you've been involved in two different things?
I think most people are supportive slash, if they did have something that they oppose to it, they don't speak up to it. I will say I did early on find that there was some guilt I had associated with it. I think through prayer and talking to people much wiser than myself, that are like, you know what, this is a calling too. It's not less than, it's also ministry. Ministry can be done in many, many ways. And we can be called to many different forms of ministry over our lifetime. And so the more obvious that calling became, the guilt subsided. Now, I did experience, without going into too much detail, I did have someone confront me on a former church member that confronted me about my time and how I was using it. And, you seem to have other interests. And it was right about the time the book was going to be released, which I had the blessings of my leadership team and other people and things of that nature. But this person was, just to be candid with you, downright ugly about it. And I listened to it for quite a while. And then at the end, we agreed to disagree, and I tried to help them a little bit. But, I got off that call, and it bothered me, the place that they were in, because I thought about what Paul said in Romans. We're supposed to, and this is really what the nonprofit is based on, is we're supposed to rejoice with those that are rejoicing and weep with those that are weeping. And here's God doing something really special in my life. I mean, it's important to me, right? And this person wasn't rejoicing with me. They were finding fault. And I was like, really, is this my issue or is it their issue? And I left saying, you know what, I need to pray for this person. There's more going on here, that they can't be happy for my success. So that's
weird, Les. He had someone in his church that was ugly and didn't like what they were doing. That's weird. I've never heard of that. You must be the only one. I've never heard that story.
You're a unicorn, Steve.
Yeah.
You're a unicorn, bro.
I take back my normative statement. You are not normative.
That's good.
No, man. Well, again, sometimes those voices are, from the outside, but like you alluded to, a lot of times they're self-imposed, those limitations we place on ourselves. It's just the fear of what the perception might be, or the fear of someone speaking up and saying that is enough in many cases to keep us from ever starting or ever, reaching for more and pushing through some of that discomfort. So good job on that. And yeah, it's not to say you won't have to face down the occasional Gladys, as I like to call them. Gladys is my church name for Karen. So I'm going to try to get that mainstream.
Well, and good for you for pushing, not only pushing, I was going to say just pushing through it, but it's more than that. you had the relationship with the Lord that was day to day enough that you sound like as if you were in a good place with Him, and you felt like you had His favor in what you were doing and why you were doing it, and all of those reasons are kind of what gets you through. Because there are gonna, Jesus said, "Woe to you when all men praise you." And I heard somebody say one time that when you're doing what He's called you to do and people are critical, congratulations, you've got the wool off your back.
I like it.
Yeah,
You got the
good.
wool off your back. So good for you. But I know that you did it you can do that in a firm but in a pastoral way, kind of like almost like a dad to a young man's son sometimes, that you need to have a talk heart to heart, and God will honor that. And it sounds like that's what happened in your case. It probably won't be the last time, but
No,
yeah, that's a valuable lesson there.
Yeah.
yeah.
Steve, you mentioned a book a minute ago. Tell us more about that.
So I have to give you a little backstory. So my wife and I, let me give you the Cliff Notes version of this. We were married in 1996, and wonderful woman, 20, what is that, 27 years? I'm going to get in trouble for I can't do my math, but 27
It
years.
is, and the only reason I know that is I was married in 96, and we've got our 27-year anniversary coming up. So yes, it's not because I'm good at math.
Thank you for helping me out, brother. So we had several miscarriages. We had 5 miscarriages. We were not Christians when we were married. That came several years later. And after becoming Christians, we started praying about adoption. And long story short, we had a very, very intense first adoption fall through, but we had 5 more after that fall
Wow.
through. So I always say 5 miscarriages, 6 failed adoptions. They're not really failed, they just weren't God's will. We know that. But then God gave us 3 children all at once. I kid you not.
Hmm.
My 2 older children are full-blooded siblings from the foster care system in Tennessee that were being watched by a family that we were friends with in the church. And then another situation, a newborn was from somebody in the church that we knew they were kind of 50-50 whether they were going to try to parent or not. And they tried, and then they decided to call us and see if we would
Wow.
adopt. So all I've been saying, I mean, God brought 3 into our home. Obviously, there's more to it than that, but 3 in our home at one time. And then it was the next weekend that we were approached by one of the elders in our home church in Nashville saying, do you guys want to go to Huntsville once a week and preach and teach and get your feet wet in the ministry? So it's like, it's kind of like you wait and you wait and you wait and you pray and pray and pray. But once God moves, he moves, right? So the book really was a formation of the intensity and the faithfulness of God through the adoption story. So I started an outline on the adoption story and some other amazing things about going into the ministry. This is going back to like 2011. And I shelved the thing. I got busy raising those 3 kids, busy full-time ministry, being a husband, a dad, et cetera, et cetera. And I have a coach now that he knew what I just told you, and he would nudge me once in a while. He's like, hey, when are you going to write that book? And I would always push back on him, like, I'm not paying you to bring up the book, and we'd go on to talk about something else. In March of last year, he said, how about that book? And he hadn't brought it up in a while. And we went on to talk about whatever we were going to talk about coaching wise that day. And I got off the phone with him, and it bothered me. I was like, you know what? I'm tired of him and asking me. And I sat down and wrote that book in 3 weeks.
Wow.
And now I had a lot to learn about how to write, how to find a good editor, how to find a good publisher, all that stuff. And to be honest with you guys, the book really was a public thank you to God. I just wanted people to know what God did with my life and say thank you. And that's what the book was. It's still mostly that. The very last chapter gets into gratitude, which is one of the segments we teach in Hurt to Hope. So there is a little bit of a segue there. And that gratitude chapter became eventually a part of that became an ebook that I did a couple months later. So that's how the book started. It's called Rivers of Hope.
Cool. What were some of the lessons you learned just from a book writing standpoint? Not so much about the content of the story, but just if there's pastors listening to this going, because I believe most pastors have a book in them, if not multiple books. So what were some of the takeaways you have from having your first book? Is that your first book that you've published, by the way?
It was, yeah.
So what are some takeaways from being now a published author?
I think you'll hear this quite a bit from other people, and I can confirm, especially with pastors being as busy as we are, just write. Don't worry about it being perfect. Don't worry about it flowing great. Just get it off your mind or off your heart onto paper. And being busy, most pastors are pretty disciplined. Find the time, make the time. I know in my schedule, I've got an hour and a half time slot Monday through Friday to go to the gym, and I treat that like an appointment. That's for my physical health, but it's also for my emotional health, right? Self-care. And I don't feel guilty at all saying I've got an appointment from 10 to 11:30 on Wednesday, because that's what I'm doing it for. I think writing's the same thing, right? I'm going to write from 4 to 5:30 in the afternoon, whatever works. I had to have that same discipline going into that new endeavor.
Yeah. Good. Good. By the way, just a little side note, I feel the same way, and this is just John's opinion. I didn't read it in the Bible this morning, so take it for what it's worth. But I feel the same toward anything that we prioritize in our life, including a side hustle for a pastor, or because again, if it's true that it's all ministry and you set some time aside on your calendar to say, this is when I'm, on this sales call, or I'm recording my podcast, or I'm writing my book, or whatever it is, it's no different, in my opinion, than if someone walks in off the street and wants to, talk to the pastor about something. Like, the pastor's doing ministry, whether it's, directly related to the, institutional, organizational role of that church or not, it's still ministry. So again, let's just take it for what it's worth. But if there's pastors needing that permission, you're getting it from me. So schedule
Hey, John,
that. Yeah, go
John, I
ahead.
had a question for Steve, and it had to do with the person you referred to a minute ago as your coach. So, like these other things, you feel free to share whatever you want or don't. But one of the things that we really, for lack of a better word, preach to people is, because we've experienced it as well, is the need to have people that can speak some things that they see into your life. So is this someone that was specifically helping you in the writing world, or was it just kind of over? Were there other categories that you gave permission to speak into your life as well? And how long have you been doing that, and what's that mean to you?
Great question, Les. I guess it was about 4 years ago. I had an appointment with another pastor from another church in Springfield. We were kind of studying out some similar material. Actually, he was pretty ahead of me in it, and he was trying to expose me to some of this new material he was reading. So we were meeting up for coffee at Starbucks, and he introduced me to a friend of his, and we exchanged cards, and we connected. And this guy was an executive director of a nonprofit in Springfield at the time, but he was trying to expand his coaching business. And so he happens to be I'm not trying to plug anybody, but he's one of the national, a well-known figures. Speaker coacher technique is what he studies. And anyway, we became friends fairly quickly, but he became a coach of mine. And it started, actually, I just wanted to figure out some ways to make an additional revenue as a pastor. But I wanted to do it with something I really enjoyed. And we did coaching there for about a year in person before I got the call to move to the church I lead now in Memphis. But I kept the relationship, and we still do coaching twice a month on Zoom. He's become a good friend, like I said. He's also, because of the training he's received from this method of coaching and speaking, he's also done some specific training for the nonprofit that we've been talking about. So he's really become quite an asset, both personally and professionally. And I can say, definitely looking back in the 4 years, I really never knew what a professional coach could do for you. You kind of think they're the expert in things and all that. But since that time, I've learned they're really somebody that listens good and asks a lot of good follow-up questions and holds you accountable to your next action steps. I have since become a coach. I don't have a lot of time to devote to that these days, but it's been night and day. The results I've seen since having him in my life, for sure.
Yep.
Yep. Game changer, man. Just getting that. And everybody needs a coach. Even coaches need a coach. So, yeah, good stuff. Good question, Les. Hey, I've got one other thing, Steve, before I ask how people can connect with you. And that is this: if there's pastors listening to this, this is a question that you can answer from two filters. One is, I want to focus on your workshops that you might potentially bring to a church. So first of all, if there's a pastor listening to this, go, man, my people need that, or I'd love to offer that to my community. How do they get signed up for that? And what would you say to that pastor? And then also from a business model, like, what does that look like for you? If you get hired by a church or contracted with a church or a group in a community that says, hey, we want to bring one of your workshops, what does that look like for you from a business standpoint to add income and revenue, in this case, to the nonprofit? I recognize all that doesn't directly go to you, but speak to that if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Should I put something in the chat box, or should I say it out loud in terms of where they can find me?
Yeah, say it out loud. We'll put it in the show notes to the podcast episode if for whatever links you want.
Okay. So if a minister's listening to this, I would encourage them to go to www. This is all lowercase, hurt, the word hurt, H-U-R-T, the number 2, and then the word hope, hurttohope.org. You will find on that page YouTube testimonials. You'll find what we're about. You'll also find a ministers tab and a church tab if you want more specific information about those two things. I'm of the belief the more I do this, that I'll give you an example. So the church we did in Florida last year, a good friend of mine that's a minister, he's been hearing me talk about it for years. He used to be in California, and he was going to bring us out there to do a workshop, and then God pulled him to Florida. And I remember something he said specifically. He said, I thought I was bringing this for my congregation. And he was. He said, I didn't know how bad I needed it personally.
Oh, sure.
And I think that's important, because I think ministers are so busy, and also, it's not one of those things like, if you got tickets to the Super Bowl or go do some real healing internal work, which one are you going to pick? Yes. And what I'm saying is, it needs to be done, but you're not always excited to do the hard work, right? Mm-hmm. So we want to make it easier for ministers to do it. And so if ministers go through it themselves, then I think they'll see the value in taking their congregation through it. So all that information's on there. We actually have a workshop scheduled for anybody that wants to go through it. I think it's the 25th and 26th of this month, which is less than 2 weeks away. And then our next one's scheduled in November. But we will fill out the form. We'll talk to you about how to bring a workshop to you or your church or both. There was another question you had in that. Remind me.
Just the business side of it. Yeah. Kind of what does that look like for you from a financial standpoint if you get contracted to go do one of these workshops in a location?
Yeah, great question. Lots of flexibility there. So remember I was talking about grants earlier. Mm-hmm. So how that would work for me specifically is if the grants, or when the grants come in, I will receive compensation, a chunk of that through the grants. And so if I go to do a workshop, then I'm not getting any of that money. However, if a workshop is scheduled, let's say a minister calls me in 2 weeks and wants to do a workshop and we get it scheduled, I would get a percentage of that revenue if I'm not receiving my salary yet. So I don't know if that's complicated. There is a model where the organization would get a percentage. My wife and I would get a percentage. Anybody that I contract with to help me pull off the workshop, they would get like a contractor's fee for less, for lack of a better title. So there are some flexibilities there. You didn't ask this, John, but I'll also throw in there's several ways to get this. If you're a church that's small, like a lot of them are, we do have scholarships. We can be, we can negotiate what the price is going to be. Maybe it's a situation where we can meet in the middle. You can also do a pass down you can either pass it down to those that choose to participate in it, or a partial part down to help minimize the cost for the ministry itself, because I know most churches don't actually have it in the budget at the beginning of the year to have this in there.
Yeah, well, that makes sense, man. It's good stuff. Les, anything else you got before we wrap up here today?
Well, thank you for the work that you're doing and the example that you are, Steve. I mean, not only internally, it would be plenty if you were just doing one of the things that you mentioned, but the fact that you're leading a local fellowship, leading a growing family that includes some children whose future would have looked completely different had not the Lord led you and your wife to step in and welcome them into your family and become your family. That's just awesome. And then your the other organization that you're a part of building, it's just awesome. And I hope that you will continue to lean into our community. Thank you for being willing to come on our podcast, because you and people that are in your tribe are why we do this. And so it's great to get to know you and learn a little bit about what you're doing.
Yeah,
good stuff. Go ahead. Sorry, Steve.
You guys keep doing what you're doing. It's so needed what you guys are doing. And I just want to encourage you, keep up the great work. It's helping a lot of people. We need you.
All right. Thank you, Steve, man. It's been fun hanging out with you. All the best as you continue to serve God and serve others through the various ways that you're doing that, man.
God bless.
Well, hey, thanks for watching this episode of the EntrePastors podcast. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can be notified every time we release a new episode. If you'd like to get connected to other pastors who are learning to think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs, then we invite you to check us out on Facebook. Just search for the EntrePastors Connect group, answer a few of our simple questions there, and we'd love to include you in the conversations. And if you're really ready to go to the next level, then we invite you to join our EntrePastors membership community. When you become a monthly subscriber, you will receive access to courses, exclusive community, and coaching that will help you along in your own EntrePastors journey. If there's anything else we can do to serve you, please visit us at EntrePastors.com, and we will do our best to serve you there. God bless everybody. See you soon.